Hi everyone, here we are, morning of day 5 on our trip to Alaska. So yesterday, day 4, we left Edmonton and we managed to get to Prince George. It was a fun ride through the mountains, through a pass there following Route 16, you can look it up. And we spent about an hour in the pass. The winds were howling quite well, unforecasted, about 27 to 30 knots at times. So it made for a little bit of a rough ride, but the scenery was really, really beautiful. And we managed to get through that and continue on up to Prince George. It was a nice overnight here, and now, if you look north the way we're going, it looks beautiful. The forecast is for 8,000 overcast to broken, and that'll be a nice change. And the winds have died down. So our intent today is about 2.5 hours, 2:40 maybe, to Watson Lake. We're going to stop and have lunch and some fuel, and then about another hour 40 into Whitehorse, where we'll spend the evening, and hopefully the next day then head into Northway and figure out Anchorage or Homer from there. So here we are. We've just departed Prince George, and I assure you we don't have rocket boost on the RV-10. Basically, we've speeded this up to about 8 times normal flight so we can condense this whole trip up to Watson Lake and into Whitehorse at a speed that's worth watching for you. So you heard me talk about the forecast being for 8,000 overcast, and it looks really good at Prince George. As once we got airborne, and we're about 1,000 feet over the ground here, you can see up to the north, the clouds were giving us a little bit of pause, like what's going on up there. And this is very, very typical of what it's like flying in these valleys, the trench, and following roads in the Northwest Territories, Yukon, Alaska. A lot of moisture, a lot of cold snow on the mountains. That cold air settles and it creates these fog banks. So you'll see here, as we get closer, we're going to even get a little bit lower. If you remember, I mentioned to you, I think there's no VFR on top in Canada. So we've got to stay below the clouds. So there's a point where we might say, you know what, we've got to turn around. Again, we're here to see Alaska, see Canada, fly it, not fly to it. So yes, we could poke up on top, get an IFR clearance, and get to our destination. But that's not what this journey is all about. When you see this beautiful scenery, you can see the road there and the river we're following. Again, this is up the trench, departed from Prince George. So now you can see the clouds have gotten a little bit lower. And we're going to go a little bit lower here just to stay below them. But you can see there are alternates here. There's a road right alongside us. It's quite a bit of marshland there. So if you do have an engine failure, you want to pay attention where you might set it down. It's really pretty here, and actually it was like this for maybe a third of the trip, and then it was beautiful again, and it was certainly very, very beautiful when we got up to Watson Lake, as you're going to see in a little bit. So here you can see the little wisps of clouds going by. But much like the last video that I mentioned to you, as long as you can see through the stuff, it's okay to continue. We want to stay a little further away from the clouds here, and you'll see me kind of zigzagging a little bit. There's just wispy pieces of fog, basically. And as the sun comes up, it burns off. So the nice thing about having flown this route before, we know where all the high spots are. The trench is actually a very safe route. It's kind of flat. There's only a couple of saddles that we'll show you here that we're going to come up on later in the flight, and basically after we get past Lake Williston there. Lake Williston, you're going to see, is a really, really nice long lake, and it's just absolutely beautiful. So the other thing, though, you got to pay attention to is you get clouds like this and bright sunshine, is you get a lot of reflectivity off of the water surface. It's certainly much more dangerous for float planes trying to land on glassy waters with reflections like that. You can lose your depth perception. But as an airplane flying low, not landing over the water, you got to pay attention to. You got to watch your altimeter. We tend to stay off to one side, usually the right side of the canyon here where possible, so we can keep a shoreline in place. There's a good example of the reflectivity you're seeing off of the water surface, but it's just really, really gorgeous. Here's a good example of the flight through Williston Lake there. You can see how you plan it, and you got high terrain off of either side. And typically what you'll see in the weather forecasting report is the mountaintops are obscured. So it's just typical flying through here. As long as you follow the line, stay on the black diamonds, follow the low line, down the lake, follow the road, you'll be fine. This is not the kind of flying we do, down in the lower 48. The good thing up here is there aren't power lines, there's not high obstacles. Where there are, they are usually marked very clearly on the map. So you want to have your sectional out, your GPS up on sectionals, and know where you are all the time. This is just really, really fun flying. And it looks like we're going a whole lot faster again here than we are. This is 8 times the speed. So as I might have mentioned earlier, we tend to fly around about 140 knots. It does a couple of things. It lets you see the scenery for a lot longer. It gives you time to turn around if you have to. You're going to have a much smaller turning radius. And it also helps with the fuel burn. You end up with a whole lot more fuel in the tanks. And if you have to turn around, it takes that pressure of having to wonder if you got enough fuel to get back off the table. This is Williston Lake here. You can see it's just really, really beautiful. I think it's about a 200-mile long lake. It's just a pleasure to fly up this lake. You don't see many people on it at all. It's very, very desolate. There, if you look off to the right, you can see some of the snow-capped mountains. It looks like clouds. That's snow. We're going pretty good north here at a pretty good clip. The scenery's changing, and it's really getting pretty. Actually, as we're getting closer here, some of those are clouds over there obscuring the peaks. But up and down the valleys, we could actually see some of the snow-covered peaks there. And again, that's what's creating some of these clouds. There you go. A little bit of low-level flying through the clouds, and look what you break out and get to see. It's just beautiful. There are some pretty wide channels, especially off to the east side here, that feed Williston Lake. I'll kind of hug the right shoreline as we're going across those, just in the interest of safety. Try and minimize the time spent over water. That's cold water up there. This lake is so pretty that at times you think you're flying down in the Bahamas. It just had a really pretty blue glow to it.
And there are a couple of airports off onto the channels, center of the lake on the right, and then on the left and right up near the end.
And we should see it in a bit here coming up. There's a nice little village, and it is a small village with a gravel runway called Quesnel, and it's right at the north end of Williston Lake. And as luck would have it, there was a caravan landing there just as we flew over it. So we talked to them and got a weather report, and some confidence from them that the further north we went, the better it got. Along this route, there are also some X'd out runways that you can use those for an emergency. There's nobody there, but if you have to set down somewhere, they are a place to land. And they're clearly marked on the map. You can see one right over there. There's the road off to the right.
And I don't remember if we'll see one coming up here on the right. Most of them are tucked a little bit down to the east side there, as Carol mentioned. And they're kind of protected from the weather, I think. But there is one right up at the north end of the lake here we'll see in a bit. Here we are, there's Quezon. You might want to pause it, but right in the center of the video. The village is off to the left, and the runway is coming down right center of screen. Right there, we're going right over top of it. And if you could look, you'd see the caravan that was just taxiing right off the runway there at the north end. So now we're kind of done with the big lake, and we're back over marshland, a river, and we're continuing the trek up to Whitehorse. And Watson Lake is going to be the intermediate stop there. And you can see now it starts to get a little narrower in the valleys here. And this is where you really want to pay attention, be looking ahead. There are no weather reporting. We did talk to a couple of aircraft that were coming from the north side, and they told us the weather looked great. So we continued. But in this whole journey here, which was, I think, pretty close to 2.5, 3 hours, we only saw 3 other aircraft. And unfortunately, it was a cool day, so we didn't see many moose. Actually, we didn't see any moose along this particular trek. Sometimes in the summertime, when it's really hot, you can see a lot more moose. You got to be looking down for all the little ponds, and you'll see the moose in there cooling themselves off. There's another runway right there on the left, you can see. That's an X'd out runway, and right alongside the river. But it is there for emergency landing if you need it. So you can see up ahead now, right center of the screen, we're starting to see some of the rising terrain. So those are saddles and stuff. They're clearly marked on the map as to what the elevation is to get across those. You can see from this particular point of view as we're approaching it, we can clearly see to the other side. So we did in fact get across these okay. But you know, if those clouds were a little lower or you couldn't see through to the other side, this is where you'd consider turning back. Here's a good picture of what it looks like. Again, you want to pay attention to your route. There, the saddle is marked. It's a 3,500 foot altitude, so it's a good time to check your altimeter. And we were, I forget, we might have been 4,500 here, and we are below the clouds. So now we know we can clear the saddle that's marked at 3,500. Should be no problem. Now, AGL here is not much. We're less than 1,000 feet here above the ground. You can see nice green area and then the brown on the screen as well. That's beetle damage. And that's what causes some of these fires. You know, a lightning strike at all that dried foliage, and the fires here can get really, really huge and just block off your route. I don't know if it'll show up here in the video, but a little north of here, just a little south of Watson Lake, there was evidence of some quite massive fires that completely traversed the valley from one side to the other. So here you can see we're down a little low. Okay, we're about 500 feet here. And but we can clearly see through the saddle here to the other side, so the visibility looks good. We can see the river there. You can see a little bit of raindrops hitting the camera lens there. And quite honestly, the camera lens is pointed down a little bit, so it does look a little lower than we are. But it was just the way the camera was mounted on the aircraft in order to get the wing off the view on the top of the camera mount. So again, if you look forward there, we got a good view all the way north. Now, you can also see if you look at the clouds there, they're very, very thin. So that's a lot different than maybe looking ahead and seeing some cumulus clouds, some convective clouds. They don't get quite as large as they do down in the lower 48 here, but Again, the freezing levels are a lot lower, so we've seen some of the convective stuff that doesn't look intimidating, yet it throws out hail. So you want to pay attention. You're going through some of these raindrops. If you think there's hail, you want to slow down. There's a good view of the river and the next saddle coming up there. Those little puffy clouds up there that you're seeing, those are not convective and really nothing to worry about here. Most of those tops don't go much more than 5,000–6,000 feet. So here we are kind of going through another high point. Nothing to sweat here. We have the road in view and the river. And in this case, the river's kind of down in the valley and the road's up a little higher off to the west side, the left side of the aircraft. But we kind of keep it in view, but again, pay attention to those black diamonds. You can see here we are off to the right side of the valley and we're in the lowest part of the valley following the river. You can see here the valley's starting to open up a little bit, starting to feel a little good here. Again, one of the things I think I've mentioned in the past is for your trip to Alaska through Canada, you've got to get comfortable with some low-level flying. Slow down. It goes much easier, but you are going to do some low-level flying on these routes. Coming back, you'll see later when we show you the video, it was clear blue when we came back. So we're much higher altitude and just a very, very enjoyable flight. This was enjoyable in its own way. There's no stress here. These are basically just stratus clouds, no convective, no rain. We can see through them. And the higher the sun got, the more they burned off. This is where all that maintenance you did on the engine before you left pays off. There you can see the reflection in the ponds. It's really, really pretty. And as we get closer here, some of these are actually camping bases. They got runways, they got seaplane bases, and take people out on hunting trips. So we started to see a little more activity as we got north. Right there where I did a wing dip, I think was we were looking at one actually. Here you can see we're starting to get a little bit higher. The clouds have lifted. If you look over there off to the left side, they are now above the top of the peaks. And apologize for the blurry picture there. You just once in a while put up with a bug or a raindrop that gets on the lens of the camera. A camera really doesn't do this justice anyway. If you're looking at a small view straight ahead here, the view left and right is just as gorgeous. And as you look up and down the valleys on the left and right side, you'll see the glaciers that feed these lakes and these rivers, and they're just beautiful. Look at that reflection in that pond and that blue water. The blue water there is from the minerals in the water. There's probably not a lot of fish in that water, but it sure is pretty. So you can see it opened up here now. We've kind of gotten out of what I would call the trench area, and this opens up into a nice wide area as we approach Watson Lake.
And here we had a camera mount failure, so the very last little bit is pictures again instead of the video.
There's Watson Lake popping up. Right there across the lake is the runway. We're turning final look at that reflection, and there we are landing. So thanks for watching.